October 17th, that's the day a century of pot prohibition ends in Canada. But not in Ontario. The government had planned to sell cannabis at stores run by a branch of the LCBO. That idea was thrown out last week. Doug Ford's Conservatives say they want private businesses to run the stores instead. In the meantime, questions remain. Who will run these pot shops? How will they be licensed? What will these stores look like? What happens to all of the illegal marijuana dispensaries Ottawa currently has? Tune in to our very first live cannabis question and answer. Do you have a question about Ontario's privatization of pot? Write your question in the comment below and we'll get Jackie to answer it during our live interview. Hello, my name is Nicole Ferrienchek. I'm live here at the Ottawa Citizen Newsroom. I'm joined by my coworker Jackie Miller. And today we're here to talk about all things cannabis. So as everyone knows, October 17th, cannabis, weed, pot, whatever you want to call it, becomes legal in Canada. But things are a bit more complicated in Ontario. So Jackie, can you tell us what we know about what's going on in Ontario right now?
Sure. Well, big changes in Ontario. The previous Liberal government had decided to sell cannabis at stores that were subsidiaries of the LCBO, called the Ontario Cannabis Store. So the new Conservative government was elected and threw that out the window, and they have decided that stores will be run by private businesses. But there isn't enough time to get those privately run pot shops up and running before October 17th. So on day one of legalization, people in Ontario will be able to buy their marijuana online only, and the stores will take another few months to be set up.
It's a big change from the government was preparing to open these OCS. They'd made the branding, they were starting to rent stores. Why do you think the government made such an abrupt left turn to make it private?
Well, I think it has to do with the philosophical leanings of the Conservative government, which tend more towards private business and perhaps away from publicly owned enterprises. So they're joining some of the provinces in the West are going to allow private stores. So they're going to learn a few lessons from what's going on in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and BC has a system where they'll allow both private and public.
So other provinces on October 17th, will they have the physical brick and mortar stores? The other ones that are private as well?
We think so. Maybe a couple of the territories. It might not. It's not clear. But certainly all the big provinces are expected to have stores up and running by October 17th. So it'll only be in Ontario that you'll have to buy your marijuana online.
So walk us through what happens on October 17th. The rest of the country is celebrating this monumental shift in public policy and in cultural values. We're lining up and buying, recreational legal marijuana, but in Ontario, there aren't any stores where we can purchase.
Well, you get in front of your computer and get your typing fingers ready to go online. So it won't be quite the same experience as in other provinces where, who knows, there might be lineups. There certainly were lineups in some of the American states where marijuana has been legalized. So it won't be quite the same atmosphere in Ontario, but you still will be able to buy cannabis, just online only.
And where can you buy cannabis online? You type in Facebook, buy cannabis.
Well, actually, the Ontario Cannabis Store, which is the LCBO subsidiary that was set up, was originally going to run the stores as well. They will still run the online system, and it will be powered by Ottawa's own Shopify.
Oh, really?
So it should run just fine.
Okay. And that will be, do they have sites up and running now that you can check out? No. Not until October 17th.
No, you have to wait till October 17th.
Do we have any idea of what those online stores will look like?
That's a good question. I don't know. Presumably you'll be able to go online and do a little bit of research. I mean, they had planned for the bricks and mortar stores that you could go in and look on an iPad to research various strains and so on. So presumably the same will be true at the online store. We don't have a lot of information. Not a lot has been released by the Ontario Cannabis Store, although they say they will be ready.
That brings us to another question, which is there was the Ottawa, what is it, the Ontario Cannabis Store.
Ontario Cannabis
Store. They had a logo made. They were starting to rent stores. So what happens to all that infrastructure?
Well, they'd actually only leased 4 stores, not one in Ottawa. So they say they'll do something else with those properties. They say that they hadn't hired that many people. They'd been doing a lot of interviews. People were being interviewed for jobs as clerks. I think they had hired some managers. They hope to redeploy some of the people they've hired because they're still running the online site, so they'll still need staff.
Right. What can we expect for prices of legal marijuana?
That's not known yet. There's speculation that it might be $9 or $10 a gram. The government wants to set the price low enough so they're competing with the black market, because a big goal of the government is to get rid of the black market. But they don't want to set it so low that it will promote marijuana use. So it's kind of a balancing act.
Right. So $9 or $10 a gram for legal marijuana. How does that compare to the black market right now?
Oh, it's around $8 a gram on average. So,
okay. So a little bit more expensive.
Yeah, but I mean that's the StatsCan average. If you go into the dispensaries, for instance, the illegal dispensaries around town, they're usually charging $10, $11, $12, although sometimes I've seen prices as high as $14, and people are paying $14 to be able to go into a store and buy cannabis rather than getting it, from a dealer on the street.
So when you order your pot online, how does delivery work?
There will be some kind of age verification system. The details haven't been announced, but presumably you will have to provide identification when you get your package. There will also be some kind of age verification on the website. I'm not sure what. If you go into the LCBO website, they have something called an age gate. A little box pops up and you have to click confirming that you're 19. So I'm sure the age verification for actually delivery. Well, I'm sure there'll be something a bit more stringent when you actually get the package.
Right, you have to sign for it and show an ID, perhaps.
Probably. Yeah.
Okay. So we have some questions coming in from online, our viewers that are watching this live video. So first off, thanks everyone for watching. If you do have any questions you'd like to ask Jackie, who is our resident weed expert here at the Ottawa Citizen. She's been covering pot for more than 3 years here. Type your questions into the story page on this website, and we'll try to get these questions answered. So we have a question coming in. Is there one province in Canada that seems to be leading this whole effort? Is Ontario a leader? Are we lagging behind everyone else? So lay out what's happening throughout the nation.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to say. Actually, I'd say the leaders are out east, probably in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. And in both of those provinces, they plan government-run stores. But they've already shown us what the stores will look like, and so we have a lot of details about what's going on. In New Brunswick, the government there considers cannabis to be a good economic opportunity, so they've really promoted it as an industry that could help the province with jobs. So I'd say those two provinces are fairly far ahead. BC is another large province where there's a lot of pot smokers. It's a little bit behind, I think, partly because they had an election in the spring and they've been a little bit slow off the mark. The 3 western provinces that will have privately run stores, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Alberta, the Ontario government has said it hopes to learn a few lessons from those provinces, and they are fairly well along in their plans. Alberta, for instance, is going through the process of handing out licenses now, and hundreds of people have applied for licenses.
In Alberta?
In Alberta. In the city of Calgary, for instance, which is about the same size as Ottawa, there were something like 250 people who applied for licenses. So they're just being awarded now in the last week or so.
And do you know when that process started, when they were saying, yes, we're open for submissions for licensing?
Well, I think, I know that in it would be late 2017, the province announced that they were going for a private model. So at that time, some companies started scouting for locations right then and renting locations and leasing them, just with the hope they would get a license. Because they were concerned that they assumed that there would be restrictions on where stores could be located, which undoubtedly will happen in Ontario as well.
School zones or
not near
hospitals.
a school, not near a community center, and perhaps not too close to each other. So that could be another problem. So a couple of companies went and leased likely spaces with the hope they would get a license. And another big question about the stores, and that's a big question in Ontario, is not only who will operate these stores, will they be mainly chain stores? Will there be room for some little mom and pop stores? And how many will there be across the province? No one knows. I mean, the assumption is there'll be more privately owned stores than there would have been if the system was run by the LCBO. And also, will there be a limit for some of these big companies? Will they be told you can only have so many stores? That happened in both Alberta and BC. So to try to prevent a concentration of ownership. But that's just not known in Ontario. So
it's a crazy time right now because it suddenly the market's opened up and it feels like it's the wild, wild west. Yeah. Can you lay out who are some of the players that might open stores in Ottawa?
Sure.
Like local or larger companies as well?
Absolutely. There's a couple of big cannabis companies that are very interested in opening stores across Ontario, including in Ottawa. Of course, there's Canopy Growth Corporation, which runs the Tweed marijuana plant in Smiths Falls. It's the largest marijuana company in the world. It's very interested in opening stores. They've already won the right to open stores in Newfoundland, Saskatchewan, and I've applied in Alberta. I don't have.
Oh, wow.
So they're in a really good position to open stores. They have the Tweed Main Street stores, they're called. They're not stores, excuse me, they're information centers, and they also recently bought the company that owns the Tokyo Smoke stores. That's a coffee shop, and they sell coffee and cannabis accessories. So
where?
There's 5 locations in Toronto.
In Toronto,
it's a real hipster kind of store. Yeah. It's so now that that's owned by Canopy as well, they would have the opportunity to perhaps sell out of those locations, including the flagship Queen Street store, a great location, as well as their Main Street stores. So there's Canopy. There's also another company in Ottawa called National Access Cannabis, which now runs an information and medical marijuana clinic.
Yeah.
So they are interested in opening stores. They've already won the right to open some stores out west under a brand called Meta Cannabis Supply Company, and they have a deal with Second Cup. So some of the Second Cup
right.
coffee shops might be converted to cannabis shops.
It's fascinating.
Oh,
isn't it?
and then there's
and there's more.
And there's more. And then there's Hydropothecary. That's the Gatineau grower. They recently changed their name to Hexo, and they have an ownership stake, which they acquired recently, in another company called Fire and Flower, which is based out west, and they are opening stores out west. And now that the market is open in Ontario, they hope to open stores in Ontario as well. Can you show us that picture?
Yes.
Of a couple of the private stores.
A big question is, what are these pot shops going to look like?
What will they look
and
like?
We don't really know that, but I'll put a picture up, and Jackie,
Okay.
you can explain.
We don't know, but we can get a few clues. Oh, here's a hip-looking store. This is in West Hollywood. It's run by a company called MidMenMen.
MedMen, I like it.
M-E-D, not Mad Med. So they are setting themselves up as a boutique. Check out that wood everywhere. Their stores are mainly in California, but they recently reached a deal with a Canadian cannabis grower, and they've created a Canadian company called MidMen Canada.
So this could
And they
possibly
hope
be
to-
coming to Ontario.
Yeah, something very similar to that. They're hoping to open stores in Ontario, so that's one possibility.
Okay, and let's see. This is our second picture we have.
Yeah, that's an actual store, a model store that's been built in Edmonton by a company called Fire and Flower.
Right, you were just mentioning that.
Yeah, and they're the company that Gatineau's Hydropothecary, Hexo, has part ownership in. So that's an example of the type of store that they'd like to open. All these stores are kind of similar. They're very modern looking, clean lines. Not really space age, but they're definitely going for often these stores are compared to Apple stores.
Yeah, I can see that.
There's no hippy dippy psychedelic posters or
right. It's not a patchouli smelling. Yes, it's meant to be clean, modern.
Yeah, and they're trying to fight some of these stoner images
right.
of marijuana use with the store design.
It's interesting the way they're branding the product as well. They're not calling it weed or pot. They're calling it cannabis, right? How significant is that?
For the most part, companies have moved to use the term cannabis, and so has Health Canada for that matter. partly because some people feel that the term marijuana in particular has pejorative connotations because it originally arose, in the United States in the 30s as a term that was used in conjunction with Mexicans for the most part. So some people actually think it's a racist, although I think a lot of people have no idea of the history of the term. But certainly terms like pot and weed, and they're more slangy, and cannabis sounds
refined.
It sounds more classy.
Yeah,
I guess.
I can see that. Do you have any sense of how the Canadian, or at least the Ontario process compares to other places where weed or cannabis has been legalized? So, namely, Uruguay was the first country in the world to legalize, or places in the States like Colorado.
Yes. Well, it's going to be quite different in Canada than in Colorado and Washington and some of the early American states, because when those states legalized, it was only by state. So pot is still illegal federally in the U.S. So even though, for instance, in Colorado, when they opened their stores in 2014, the state said it was legal, but the federal government said, oh, no, it's not. So as a consequence, a lot of the companies, they couldn't even deal with banks. They were using big armored trucks to carry around cash. They had a lot of trouble raising money. And it's not the case in Canada. The growers now, they're growing medical marijuana, and they've raised billions of dollars to do that. A lot of them are represented on the stock market. And the same growers who are growing the medical marijuana now will be providing the recreational marijuana. So the scale is much larger. Canopy, for instance, is a huge corporation worth billions of dollars, much larger than the companies, say, in Colorado, who are supplying the Colorado market.
So is Canada leading the world then? You could
Yeah,
say that
it
Ontario is
seems to
lagging
be.
behind, but as a country...
Yeah, absolutely. It seems to be leading the world in terms of the global market for medical marijuana. And as I said, Canopy is the largest company. We have a couple of other very large companies, Aurora and Afria, and they have deals, export deals, and various licensing arrangements and so on with countries around the world. So I think it's generally acknowledged that Canada is a world leader in the cannabis trade right now.
So, I mean, I think the biggest question on everyone's mind is how stores are going to apply to be legalized, and that's not something that we know yet.
No, we don't know, and presumably they will be licensed by the province, although the cities will have to play a role too. They'll probably have to introduce zoning bylaws to control where these stores are located. There's consultations going on right now, and will continue for who knows, a couple of months anyway. This has to be done fairly quickly, though.
So when will we see brick and mortar stores in Ontario?
Okay, the government has said April 1st, 2019, the stores will open. We don't know how many, whether presumably it will be a gradual rollout over the years, but there will be some stores open on April 1st, and we don't know where, or whether there will be an Ottawa store. Presumably there will be. The private companies that I've spoken to said that once they have a license, and in other provinces, just the licensing procedure alone can take a couple of months to get security clearances and so on. I mean, you have to set up a license department first of all. You have to have all the rules in place. But once they have a license, they say that physically they can get a store, lease a building, do any renovations needed, get it stocked, get people hired and trained in about 8 to 12 weeks.
Okay. So it's a tight timeline. Do you see April 1st?
Timeline.
April Fool's Day. Do you see that being a doable?
I wonder if they thought about that.
Yeah. They're taking it away from us again.
Yeah.
Can you explain, because the OCS store is still involved with purchasing weed and then selling it to the companies that will have licenses.
That's
Can
right.
you explain how all three parties work? Who grows it, who's selling it, and then who's finally selling it to the consumer?
Okay. So the growers are licensed by Health Canada, so the federal government. So those are growers like Canopy, Tweed Marijuana, that grow for medical marijuana. They will also be licensed to provide the recreational marijuana. And in the case of Ontario, the growers will sell it still to the Ontario Cannabis store, who will act as a wholesaler The Ontario Cannabis Store will buy it, and then it will resell it to the private stores. So the Ontario Cannabis Store is still a wholesaler as well as operating the online distribution system.
And that is the store that was going to be...
Yes, that was the store, the LCBO
right.
branch store that was supposed to originally run the stores. So it's still involved in cannabis.
And it still means that any product you buy, even though it's at a private store, is still being closely regulated by the federal.
Absolutely. The federal government regulates the production of all marijuana products and decides what you can buy. For instance, when the stores first open, you'll only be able to buy the dried flower and oil. And that's decided by the federal government. They have promised, though, that within a year, other products will be available, edible products like brownies and cookies and candies, presumably, and the vape pens, which are quite popular.
So that would be a year from October?
A year from October.
Okay.
Sometime a year after legalization.
Okay. So Ontario stores won't have to wait too much longer to get those second round of products, because they're only opening in April.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true. So... and that will also, the fact that all these products are not available initially will also affect how quickly customers shift from the black market, or you can buy any of these things already to legal stores. So
that's an interesting point. Is, especially in Ottawa, there's a pretty robust number of, how many, 20
There's about
local
20
shops where you can currently buy, and they've
right.
been raided by police and they reopen. What do we know about them? What will happen once weed becomes legal? Are they able to transition into becoming legitimate sellers?
Well, that's a big unknown. Whether people who are currently involved in the illicit market will be able to apply for a license to run a store, that will be known presumably in the next few months when the licensing rules come out. Now, certainly anyone who's now running an illegal store, the government has said, hey guys, shut them down. The previous Liberal government said the same thing. We're coming after you, you better shut down. So the Ontario Cannabis Act, which will go into effect on October 17th, includes big fines, not only for people who operate stores illegally, but for the landlords. So some of these landlords will be facing, $1 million fines, if they're, and that's expected to probably have a bit of an impact on these stores. Now, whether or not the stores will remain open, nobody knows. There's already one in Ottawa that's closed. The landlord, they saw the writing on the wall. The landlord said, hey, guys, I don't want to pay these fines. And they were worried about the increased penalties for the store operators.
So it was the landlord's decision to shut down, not the owners?
It was a combination.
Right.
The store operator also knew these increased penalties were coming, so it was a joint decision.
Yeah.
And another operator has said he plans to close down October 1st, and he hopes to apply to get a license to run a legal store, but nobody knows
how that's going to work,
whether that will happen. And different provinces have approached that differently. And Alberta, for instance, has said, no, we don't want anyone that's been involved with the illicit market to get a license. BC, they're a little bit more open to it.
Huh.
Yeah.
Those little mom and pop stores,
Well, some of them are mom and pop, and some of them are run by chains. Some of the illegal dispensaries that opened in Ottawa appear to be run by a fairly large chain out of BC. It's often hard to tell who's running them, because if you go in and talk to the clerks, who are usually really, really friendly and nice, they either don't know or they won't say who the managers and the owners are.
Interesting.
They don't really want to have their names made public, so it's really hard to tell what they might do.
So this just struck me, October 17th, we might find ourselves in a situation where there's no legal brick and mortar stores in Ontario.
Yes.
The current black market stores may be all shut down, maybe not all of them, but some of them, in anticipation of fines.
Right.
You can order online, but that's not going to be delivered. So,
well, it will be delivered, but
not on the day.
Oh,
right?
I don't know how fast they'll deliver. They'll probably use Canada Post, so you might definitely will be. Oh, no, they're better than that. They deliver all the medical marijuana in there.
Okay.
They do it pretty quickly, but you're right. It won't be the same as just walking into a store.
It won't be the same historic day.
Yeah.
Though Ottawa's lucky because we can go right across the border, right?
Absolutely. Presumably there will be a store open in Hull. Now the Quebec government has decided to have the marijuana stores run by the Liquor Commission.
Okay.
So they'll be publicly owned, and they only plan to open 20 stores across the province initially. But presumably at least one of them will be in Hull. So it'll be interesting to see whether people who want to celebrate legalization by shopping at a store might just go over the bridge and line up over there.
There's a few more questions coming in, and then we'll need to wrap this up shortly. Some of the questions that are coming in we've answered already.
Okay.
If Ontario's model, the privatization model, is very successful, do you think other provinces could follow suit? So some of the Atlantic provinces, perhaps?
Well, the other provinces have already decided on their model. So those decisions have already been made. It was quite an unusual development for Ontario to switch course at this late date. So the other provinces are all, well on the way, and who knows, maybe in the future some of the provinces that have government-run outlets might change, but they're certainly not going to do it in the next few months, one would assume.
Well, hopefully, for their sake.
Yeah, it might be a bit problematic for them to get things going by October. In fact, when the speculation first started about whether Ontario would make the switch to private stores, the first thing everyone said was, how can they do that by October 17th? It's not possible.
And the answer was no,
it's
not possible.
It's not possible. So,
you did mention before that cannabis in Canada is a multi-billion-dollar industry. What's going on with the pot stock market? Who's investing? Who's making money off of this?
Well, it's up and down all the time. It's been quite a roller coaster ride. There's billions of dollars being invested in it. Certainly, Canopy in Smiths Falls has seen. From the time it went on the stock market, the stock went way up. Sometimes goes down, sometimes goes up. So, but suffice it to say, there's a lot of people making a lot of money. But how long that will continue, who knows? I mean, there's also a lot of companies trying to get into the growing business, trying to get licenses, making big promises, saying, "Oh, I'm going to build the world's biggest marijuana growing facility," and there's a lot of talk and big promises. So it remains to be seen how many of those companies will remain. And there's consolidation going on now, with big companies swallowing up the smaller companies.
Right.
So. Do you want to know what remains the same?
What remains the same, Jackie? What do we
know? With all this change, actually, the only real change in Ontario is where you'll buy your cannabis, what kind of store you'll buy it at. But some things are absolutely the same. You have to be 19. That's the age. You'll be able to possess 30 grams. So in other words, when you go to the store, you can buy 30 grams, have it in your possession. Suppose if you wanted to, you could buy 30 grams, take it home, and then go back to the store. But you can only be in public with 30 grams in Ontario.
Like in possession.
In possession, that's right. Yeah.
Being at home is still in possession, though, isn't it?
In public possession. In possession of public. And Quebec gets another rule, but that's another story.
Okay.
So you can also, if you want to grow your own, you can grow up to 4 plants per residence. That remains the same. And in terms of where you can...
Can you buy seeds?
Seeds or clones, those will be for sale as well.
At
you
the
can
pot
buy
shops themselves?
Presumably, because you were going to be able to buy them at the LCBO outlets. So yes, and online as well, I believe.
You can order a live plant and put it on your patio.
You could order a live plant. That's a good question. It definitely will be for sale, though.
Or you might need to just buy a seed and nurture it.
Yeah, you plant it yourself.
This is my baby. What else do we know for sure that's going to stay the same?
Okay, the other thing is where you can consume cannabis.
Practically
nowhere in Ontario, in no public place. So you're restricted pretty much to your own private home. And that includes your balcony or your backyard. But if you happen to live in an apartment or a condo that has, say, a no smoking policy, you just might be out of luck. There's really no place for you to smoke, which is a problem that's widely acknowledged. And the previous government had said they would consider cannabis lounges. They would study the idea, as well as setting up places outside apartments and condos where people could smoke.
Like smoking patios.
Yeah, they call
smoking
them,
parks.
They call them designated outdoor I don't know.
Beside the dog
Yeah.
park, you have your smoking park.
Yeah, but that would be part of the condo or the apartment. So because smoking in parks and other public places is banned, or walking down the sidewalk is banned, and you won't be able to buy cannabis at the bar. So that's why the idea of cannabis lounges was being considered. The new government hasn't mentioned that. It's not to say they won't consider it, they just haven't mentioned it.
Interesting. Well, thank you, Jackie, for this
you're
enlightening conversation. There's lots to come, but stay tuned and we'll continue providing all the news. Thanks everyone for watching live, and we'll see you again soon. Once I turn our picture off.
Bye.